Howdy, this is Karen from KarenDawn Designs, and today I'm going to show you how to work with double-pointed needles. To get started working with double-pointed needles, take one of your needles and cast on all of the stitches that you need for your project. I am going to use a long tail cast on, and I am going to cast on 20 stitches for this example. So I will cast on quickly and then be back to show you what to do. I have now cast on 20 stitches, and the next thing I need to do is divide these 20 stitches among my other double pointed needles. I am going to be using a set of 5 needles total, so that means my stitches will be divided onto 4 needles and I will have the 5th needle as my working needle. Since I have 20 stitches, I want to make them as even as possible, so 20 divided by 4 is 5, so I need 5 stitches on each needle. Go ahead and push the stitches down to the end of your needle, take up a second double pointed needle, and you want to slip stitches to the second needle. Slip them as if to purl, so putting your needle in purlwise, that way you will not twist your stitch. So we're slipping 5. 1, make sure you don't split it, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then those 5 stitches can be pushed down to the center of that needle. Then you can just let that droop. Pick up another double pointed needle and do the same thing, slipping the next 5 stitches to this needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once again, slide those stitches down to the center. You can let that needle droop, pick up one more double pointed needle and slip the next 5. And at this point, you probably will have these needles be in the way a little bit. Just try to ignore them the best that you can. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And slide those down. Then we should have 5 remaining on our original needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And go ahead and slide those toward the center. The next thing that we need to do is make sure that our stitches are not twisted. So sometimes I lay this down on the table, especially if I have a lot of stitches so I can see it. But basically you want it so all of the bottoms of your stitches are toward the center of your circle or square of needles. Then find the place where the ends are and pick up your 5th double pointed needle. Make sure you are using the working yarn, the yarn coming from your ball of yarn. And go ahead and get that ready. And I will show you the next step. So you should have your needles positioned where the 2 needles that are not connected with stitches are the basically the top needles, your left and right needles. Go ahead and try to ignore the other 2 needles as much as possible, and you'll also need to try to ignore your tail, your yarn tail. So this can be a little bit cumbersome when you're first starting out to juggle all of these needles, but it gets a lot better, especially once you get started. So the next thing you need to do is push these stitches on this needle, so the one that there is no yarn connected to, push these stitches up to the end of the needle. Then you need to pick up your 5th empty double pointed needle, because this is the one we're going to use to knit stitches onto. I like to have this needle in front of the one that is below it, and it'll kind of be in front of and then in back of whichever one you prefer of the needle that the stitches or the yarn is coming from. So go ahead and insert your empty double pointed needle into the first stitch over here, and it might be tight first stitch. Mine always is. And then make sure you're not twisting any of these. And again, ignore the tail. And take your yarn and wrap it. We're just going to be doing knit stitches. So wrap it for knitting around. And again, you may have to juggle the other needles. Just try to keep them out of the way as much as possible. So there I've knit a stitch. You can pull it off that needle. And then go ahead and knit the second stitch. And again, I'm really trying to just focus on these two needles in my hand and not the other needles. So there's the second stitch. Knit a third stitch. Move the others out of the way. So there's the third stitch. Two more. This one just really wants to get in here. And this will be a lot more comfortable once you have more stitches on the needles. So there is 4, and then one more. If I can get in there, we'll make 5. Okay, then this needle now is your empty needle. Take the stitches, push them toward the middle of this needle, and then find your next needle in line, so the one that is connected right there. Double check that nothing is twisted. I like to move this needle so it is in front of the needle below it, like that. And then take your empty double pointed needle, move the stitches, so the stitches we're about to work, up toward the end of this needle. And again, try to ignore all the other needles. Here's my empty needle right here. I'm going to use it to knit the next stitch. Now you want to make sure that your yarn is coming from behind. You want to make sure that you're not wrapping it in front of this needle. Then if you do that, you're creating a yarn over. So make sure that it's coming from back here onto the needle. Again, move that needle out of the way. And I've knit a stitch. No extra yarn overs or anything. Knit the next stitch. Here is 3, 4, and 5. And once again, like before, you will end up with this needle as the empty one. Push these stitches toward the middle. Move around to the next needle in line. Again, you can see they're connected right there. And push the stitches up to the end of that needle. Ignore all the others. Grab your empty needle and use it to knit this stitch off of this needle. Again, making sure your yarn is coming around the back, not wrapping over any extra needle. So there's the first stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, and push those down toward the middle. Look to see this is the next needle in line, so go ahead and get it arranged. Get rid of that tail and push the stitches up. There you go. Again, make sure your yarn is coming from behind. Use your empty double pointed needle and start knitting the next 5 stitches. I just split that stitch. Let's try that again. Sorry. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think I have a split stitch right here, 5. And again, like before, this is your empty needle now, and push those down to the middle. And we have knit 4 needles. So you'll see we're back around. You can tell from where your tail is, we're back around to that first needle. So this is a good point to double check, make sure nothing is twisted, everything looks fine, and you're basically going to continue this around. So we have knit one round so far. So when you come back here this first time, you'll notice that there's a pretty loose gap right here. So what I like to do, so we'll go ahead and get this first needle ready to knit from. Whenever you knit this one, so again, make sure you don't wrap it around any extra needle. There we go. So I knit the first stitch, and then when I insert my needle for the second stitch, I give this a tug, just a really firm tug, and kind of keep that tension up as I'm wrapping it and knit that stitch. And that will help that gap that formed when you were joining the stitches in the round. And there might still be a little bit of a gap at the end, and if so, when you weave in that tail, you can use that to close the gap. There we go. And you just want to continue doing this in the round. So I've come to the end of that needle, push the stitches back, go on to the next needle, and work from it. And just keep doing this and following your pattern, trying to just focus on the two needles that you're working with at the time. Ignore the other needles. Try to not have them get in the way. And once you've knit a few rounds, it will get a lot easier. So I'm going to knit a few rounds off camera and come back and show you. So I've knit a few more rounds so you can see the knit stitches here. And also now you can clearly see where the 4 needles belong, and they're not quite so wobbly. So that way when you are working on the needles, it's a little easier to have them just be able to be ignored. They're not trying too hard to get in the way. And you'll notice they just kind of flop around a little bit, but just do your best to ignore them. So you come to the end, push those down, turn to the next one. Again, I like to have this needle come in front of the next needle in line, push the stitches down to the end, and then knit the next stitch. So one thing that you want to watch out for is that sometimes you can form ladders in between the needles. This is one reason I recommend using 4 needles to hold your stitches and a 5th needle to work on, rather than using a set of 4 total where you have 3 and the 4th needle is your working needle. This just gives a little extra room for the stitches to be able to form, and you don't end up with ladders quite as often. But if you are worried about that, my suggestion, when you go here, give a little bit of an extra tug, knit that stitch, and then just like I showed you when you were knitting the second round, at this point when you've inserted the needle into the second stitch, you can also kind of give it a little extra tug to firm that up and knit the next stitch. And that's just going to kind of draw in the stitches between those 2 needles to help not create so much of a space and create a ladder. So I'll go ahead and knit to the end of this needle, and there you go. That is how you use double pointed needles. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you would like more knitting tutorial videos, take a look at the other videos available on my channel and make sure to hit subscribe so that way you can be notified when new tutorial videos are posted. You can find my patterns on Ravelry. I am Karen Robinson. Thanks and happy knitting.